All right. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve.
Hi, everyone. When Alex asked me if I would be interested in addressing you this afternoon about the expectations of a landlord when you rent an apartment in Boston, I immediately thought of a book that my wife was reading when we were expecting our first child. The book broke down her entire pregnancy month by month, told you the changes that were going on inside of her body, as well as explaining what stages in development the baby was at. So I hope that when I'm done today, you'll have a better understanding of the different stages that you need to go through to rent an apartment in Greater Boston, and what to watch out for and what to be aware of. After graduating from Syracuse in 1988, I immediately started working at Beacon Realty Properties. It's a company that my dad started in 1959. I actually rented my first apartment to someone when I was 12 years old. So I figure I've signed over 6,000 leases in the city of Boston. And I'm at 37 years, Alex, not 32. So I'm taking my 5 years back.
Absolutely my fault.
5 more years of experience. All right, so let's get started. So when you go out to look for an apartment in Boston, there are going to be two types of people that you're going to meet. The real estate broker makes his or her living by acting as an intermediary between the prospective tenant and the landlord. The first time you sit down with the agent or the broker, they should make you sign a fee agreement. And that fee is an agreement that's going to explain what their compensation is and what you're going to pay them if they're successful in finding you an apartment. The broker fee can range anywhere from half month's rent to a full month's rent, whatever you agree upon. You have to be careful to read anything you sign, and especially these fee agreements, because there are two different types of fee agreements. There's one fee agreement that says that the agent has earned their commission if you're accepted by the landlord. That is not the fee agreement you want to sign. You want to sign the fee agreement if you decide to work with a real estate agent that says that the fee is due once the lease is signed. That's really important, because then that's going to give you a chance to think about what you're doing, look over the paperwork, speak to any potential roommate that you might be applying with, and make sure you're on the same page. Then you sign the contract, and then you would pay the broker their commission. If you find a landlord or a management company to deal with directly, it's illegal for that person to charge you a commission. For this reason, obviously, many people try to save money by dealing with the owner directly or the management company. This will sometimes take more work, more effort, because landlords are not around as often, but saving up to a month's rent is great motivation, and I suggest it strongly. People also like dealing directly with the person who owns the property, because once the broker has collected their commission, human nature says that if there is a problem and you reach out to that broker that says that they're going to be available to you 24/7, they're going to refer you to the owner or to the management company. So by meeting the landlord and feeling comfortable about living by the terms and conditions that you both agree to, I think the chances of having a successful year are significantly increased. So now you found an apartment that's in the location that you want, the condition that you want, and the price is right. So now what? The broker or owner will ask you to fill out an application. The application is going to provide the owner with a brief history about you. Try to fill it out completely as best you can. You should be carrying around with you when you're going out to look at these apartments. You should have a driver's license. with you. You should have your either an acceptance letter or your BU ID. And if you're a foreign student, it's a great idea to have your passport, visa, and I-20. That way, if you see something you like and you decide to move forward, you have the paperwork with you, and that'll be necessary to complete the application to submit for acceptance. Overall, the rental market in Boston, this does not really change very often. It remains highly competitive with strong demand and limited inventory driving prices up, unfortunately. Don't go into the process. That being said, don't go into the process feeling desperate. That's not a good way to be. It's a mistake. Just gather as much information as you can right now, so that when you see a unit that checks off most, if not all, of your boxes, you'll be able to move forward feeling as if you've made a good decision. All right, don't go out for the first time, find an apartment, feel like you're being pushed into a corner and you have to act right away. It's the beginning of March. You still have plenty of time. You'll be okay. Just, slow it down, slow the process down, think about what you're doing, gather all your information, and once you're ready to move forward, then move forward with confidence. As we get closer to September 1st, people are renting the best units available. And the longer you wait, the less choice you have. But remember what I said just a minute ago. Don't be desperate. Bad way to rent an apartment. Just know that now is a great time to be doing your homework, your research, finding any roommates, looking at neighborhoods, talking to your parents, looking at student loans. March is a great time to do all of that. And then March, April, you go out and you find an apartment for next year. That allows you plenty of time to find something and lessens the chance of making this mistake with a quick decision. The lease you sign is a binding agreement between you and the landlord. It's a legal document, so know what you're signing and make sure you're comfortable doing so and can comply with the agreement. All right, if you're signing a lease for a year and you're only going to be here for a semester or 9 months, it's probably a really good idea to ask what's going to happen for those last 3 months that are remaining on the contract when you want to leave, before you sign the contract, not after you're bound by it. My office uses a lease from the Rental Housing Association, which is like this, a little show and tell. They have their logo up top here. This is sort of the gold standard in the city. Whenever you see anything from the Greater Boston Real Estate Board or the Rental Housing Association, you know that the paperwork is good. Every lease can be different, so please make sure you read it and understand what you're signing. Honestly, I have a lot more respect for someone when we're signing a contract when they say, "Can I sit down and read the lease?" Of course, I always say yes, but it's just great that they want to read it, they want to know what they're signing, they want to know what their obligations are going to be. If you're going to sign a lease with someone that you're just meeting for the first time, or someone that you've known for years, just know that both people are going to be 100% responsible for the full performance of the lease. Make sure you know who you're going to be living with and are comfortable with that person, or his parents or his or her parents will be able to fulfill the obligation. All right, just as an example, if Alex and Meredith find a 2-bedroom apartment in the South End that they're going to rent together, and the rent is $3,000 a month, and they agree to each pay $1,500 a month to each other, the lease is saying that they're responsible for the $3,000 rent. So if Alex decides to move into another apartment or leave Boston, they're both 100% responsible for that contract and fulfilling that contract. So make sure you have those hard discussions with any potential roommate before you sign the contract. Don't rush into a decision that you're going to regret later on. You'll have a lousy year, and it could also be very costly. So now you want to make sure you've got this lease in front of you, and it's a blank lease. So the owner or broker will start filling things in. You want to make sure that the exact address of the apartment that you're renting is written on the lease. I mean, that sounds very obvious. Of course, it's going to have the address, but if you go out and you look at 3, 4, 5 apartments with someone, and you go back and say, I want to rent the second one. Well, your recollection of the second one and the person who's writing the lease, his recollection of the second one might be different. So you might want to rent apartment 4. They write down apartment 5 on the lease. No one catches it. Congratulations, you just rented apartment number 5. So, you just want to make sure you should take notes when you're out looking at these apartments with questions and things that are told to you, and then make sure that whatever is said to you verbally is in the lease. If it's not in the lease, it doesn't count. You need to know the name and address, of the landlord, who to get in touch with if you're having any issues or problems, or just, who owns the property. I think that's a good thing to know. You want to know the term of the lease. You want to make sure that if they tell you it's a 1-year lease starting in July, that on the contract, you've got a 1-year lease starting in July. Who to contact for maintenance. Is there an emergency phone number that you're able to contact after the office is closed? Not an issue today, but if you're living in the apartment and you've got water leaking into your unit, it's really nice to know who you're going to call, and know that number beforehand, and not wait until you're getting flooded out. What utilities are included with the rent, and what you'll be responsible for. So again, if they tell you that heat and hot water is included with the rent, when you get that lease, in the lease, it's going to say heat and hot water is included with the rent. So again, it's just a really great idea to be able to review the lease, make sure everything that was told to you and that what you're relying on is in that document. In order to avoid additional problems during the lease, you want to make sure this is just a sample, and of course every one of these has a great story after 37 years, but I'm told to be efficient during my speech, so I'm just sticking and moving forward. What is the policy on painting? Now, if the lease says you can't paint, then that means don't paint. Can you hang pictures on the walls? Is parking included with the rent, or do you have to rent an off-street parking spot? What's the process for that? If you're going to rent a spot, on the premises, what's the process in reserving a spot, in the parking lot that might be behind your building? What's the extra cost? What are the additional deposits? Are pets allowed? That's always a question that we get. You should know that before you decide you want to bring your dog up to Boston and bring it into the apartment. When can the landlord enter the apartment? Always a great question. What happens if you want to add an additional person onto the lease? Can you? Again, if there's 2 of you, or if there's 1 of you and you're relying on adding an additional person onto the contract after you've signed it, what's the process in doing that, and how do you go about doing that? And you want to make sure that answer satisfies you, so that if you need to add an additional person onto the contract to make it more palatable for you, you want to know what that process is and what those steps are. Are you allowed to sublet your unit before the end of the contract? And again, what is that process? What do you need to do to get off the lease when you want to get off the lease? Now, it's common in Boston to collect up to 3 months' rent, not including the broker fee. When you sign the lease, or before you move in, depending on the landlord's requirements. So I'd just like to go over those 3 months with you so you get a better understanding of what you're handing over. The first month's rent is obviously used to cover the rent for the first month of the lease. That's the least complicated month you could possibly pay. A landlord can also collect up to, but no more than, a sum equal to the rent to be used as a security deposit. So we'll go back to that apartment that Alex is leasing. He's going to give me the first month's rent, which is $3,000. He's also going to give me a security deposit, which is equal to $3,000, no more. If the landlord collects a security deposit, he has to give you some additional paperwork. He needs to give you an apartment condition statement. Excuse me. And that is a statement of the condition of the apartment. Now, you should read it to make sure it's correct. You have 15 days after your lease begins to make any corrections or notify the owner if there are any issues or problems that you don't want to be responsible for when you move in, or when you move out, rather. So, what will happen is, if you're going to go out and look for an apartment, you might be with yourself, definitely going to be with someone that's opening the door, whether it's the broker or the management company. Sometimes the current tenants will be in there with all of their stuff. Some of you might bring a friend, some of you might bring your parents. There's a lot of people moving around this apartment at the same time. So, after the current tenant moves out, the apartment will be clean. You get into that apartment, you're going to be able to see a lot of things that you probably didn't notice or see when you were looking at the apartment the first time. So if there's a cracked window, if there's a hole in the wall, if there are scratches on the hardwood floors or stains on the carpet, anything you don't want to be responsible for when you move out, the best thing to do, what I suggest, is to take pictures or take a quick little video and then send it to the owner within those first 15 days. And that'll protect you, that'll protect your rights. They can't come back and say that you caused the problem. So that's really important. They also need to give you when they take a security deposit, they have to put the money into escrow, and they need to give you the name of the bank that your deposit is being held in, the address, and also the escrow account number. With a security deposit, you are entitled to collect interest up to 5% per month, or whatever the landlord is earning in their escrow account. The deposit has to be held for 1 year in order for you to collect that interest. If you stay for 9 months and they return that deposit, they have 30 days after the lease to return your deposit. If they return that money to you and you don't hit that 1 year, then you get your money back, assuming that the apartment is returned in the same condition that it's rented in, but you are not collecting any interest at all. The last month's rent can also be collected to cover, obviously, the last month of your tenancy. But unlike the security deposit that has to be held in escrow, the last month's rent does not. That's money that the landlord can take and spend freely. But unlike the security deposit, you begin to collect interest on that immediately. So if you stay in that apartment for 9 months, then you get a prorated share of that 9 months security deposit, 9 months interest for the last month's rent. Now, you should also receive the tenant lead law notification that explains everything you've always wanted to know about lead paint. By law, everyone that rents an apartment or buys a house in the US is supposed to see this documentation and sign off on it. 3 other addendums that my office uses that aren't necessarily required But again, it just makes things a lot easier and clearer when it comes to people's responsibilities. We use a no smoking addendum. All of our buildings are smoke free. And if someone tells you that, again, it needs to be in writing. So that's why we have everyone that moves into the building sign off saying that they understand that it is a smoke-free building. We also use a mold addendum, which talks about mold and how to prevent mold from growing, typically in a bathroom. And we also have, and it sounds worse than it is, it's an insect infestation addendum. It basically just talks about you keeping your unit clean, taking your trash out on a regular basis, letting us know if you have any issues or problems, and what our responsibilities are as a landlord, as far as having an exterminator come over to the apartment. The city of Boston requires every 6 months. We do it every 3, just for preventive reasons. But again, you want to know, how often the apartments and the buildings are being exterminated. One question that a lot of people ask me all the time are about pet deposits. Pet deposits in the state are not allowed. They are completely illegal, as are key fees. So if they're asking you for a pet deposit or a key fee, I would strongly dissuade you from paying those charges. You're going to find out a lot about your potential landlord when you read their lease. It's important, again, I'll say it again, to understand what you're signing and agree with all of the rules and regulations before you sign the contract. It's just going to make your life a lot easier. Now, I began telling you about the book, what to expect when you're expecting. Let me just finish by saying that when I pulled up to the hospital, my kids were all born at the Brigham and Women's Hospital with my wife in labor, and I handed my car keys to the valet. I instinctively started telling him how far apart my wife's contractions were. And he looked at me and he gave me great advice, which I will also share with you. He said, "Sir," he goes, "walk through those doors and someone will be there to help you." And that's really the best advice that I can give you is, Boston and the agents and the owners and the management companies, everybody knows what they're doing. They've been doing this for a long time. They understand the process. The best advice I can give you is just try to find someone that you connect with, that you trust, that you like, spending some time and speaking with them on the phone, and they're listening to you and they're showing you what you want, and just go with it. If things go south, you can always walk away and say, "Thank you very much, but I'm going to look somewhere else." But it's just really important that you find someone that you can trust and that you can work with. And I think you'll have a great experience finding an apartment in the city of Boston.
You. Well, thanks, Steve. Weirdly enough, no questions yet.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. As Steve said, he's been doing this for a long time. Our staff is here and we work in housing resources as well. So we're here to kind of answer questions. We'll hang out until there's questions. I will kind of point out there's been a slideshow going on in the background. So I will actually just run through that and give people some extra resources. Like I said, we do have on our website either the QR code or I put it in the chat, our list of events for this year. If you register for today's event through there, what I'll do is also send the slides and the recording through that, but it will be posted on the Housing Resources website within the week. We do have a lot of various resources available to students. So for those of you who may be new students, especially, there is the BU Off-Campus Services housing or website. It's a great place. It's kind of like apartments.com, but more tailored to college students. So you can look for apartments based on your location and BU's location. So if you're on the medical campus, you can actually look for apartments based on their distance and commute time from the medical campus. You can look at different public transit options, look for roommates. You can look at different profiles for everyone. So great place to look. There's a lot of different alternate housing options. So, we've had more and more students use Nesterly, which is a great option. There is just a little bit of a brief overview of some of the neighborhoods in Boston where students live, just based on kind of what we've seen working with students. This is again on the Housing Resources website. And then we do have a housing guide for students that was just released a couple weeks ago. It's actually built by BUMC students. So they provided feedback and reviews for different landlords, apartment companies, in different neighborhoods. So if you haven't, I would absolutely take a look at that. It's a great resource because it will go through, I think there's a couple hundred different like apartments where students are living, the neighborhoods that our students are living in, how much they're paying, and then they actually will rank different landlords and apartment management companies based on who they're working with. And then there's just a bunch of fun resources. I say fun. If you're having lease trouble, pest trouble, things like that, various government agencies that you can reach out to with issues. That's another area where our office is happy to work with students. If you're having landlord or like legal issues and you're just kind of looking for advice or direction, we're happy to answer those questions for you, or point you in the right direction. And just some more other resources. There's a ton of questions now. So let's start from the top. Are there any companies or managers that you would recommend? I say this having Steve here. We don't recommend any company or manager. Steve does this because he does enjoy just working and talking to our students. So, while Beacon Realty is an option, we do, there's no one company or manager that we're going to recommend. We do usually point out that on our website, there is a list of different apartment properties near the medical campus. And our apartment guide actually does include students who have reviewed landlords and property managers that they've had. So that's a little bit of a way for you to see who other students are working with, where they live, and how they would review people. So can't recommend anyone in particular. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of landlords and companies and managers in the Boston area. So a lot of times it's just how you feel, like Steve said, it's really just if you talk to someone, you're not getting a good vibe. There's a lot of places to rent. There's really no reason to rent from someone if you're not getting like a good vibe from them when you're working with them.
Alex, the one thing I would add is that BU off campus website.
Yep.
That I'm assuming people have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Those companies that are on there, they have a history of working with BU.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm sure that, like you said, they're not endorsing anybody, at least if issues come up, and I think it keeps everyone a little more honest, knowing that they're on the BU page, and it's an honor to be on the BU page. So they probably try a little harder to resolve any issues that might come up.
That's a great point. And also that reminds me to plug our housing resources fair is going to be in May. And it has a lot of the same companies that are on the off-campus services website where you can talk to those companies live. So if by May you're still looking for a place to live, we'll have a fair and we'll send that information to new and incoming students, and continuing students, letting you know that fair is coming up. But they are a lot of the same companies and apartment brokers or apartment management companies that you'll see on the off-campus services website. Okay, this is actually a good question. Seeking out a broker versus a management company. I would say generally when you're working with a private broker, private landlord, one of the things that you'll have to look out for is that brokers often charge a broker fee, which if you've not lived in Boston before, it's fairly unique to Boston. I think maybe New York has it too, and that's it. It's not really a thing in most places. Working with a broker or real estate agent can be great. They can help you find a place. They can kind of take you around the city if you're new. If you aren't able to be here in person, there and a place you want to look at is, not um, through an apartment company or a company. It's great to work with a broker because they can do a lot of the work for you, but they generally will charge anywhere from 1/2 to 1 month of a broker fee of your monthly rent. So it's a pretty large upfront cost with how expensive Boston is. So that's one thing to kind of consider. If you're looking at like a management company, so like an apartment complex, it's a lot for our students. Oftentimes they find that easier if they're international, especially because they tend to work a lot with international students. They do a lot of, they'll do virtual tours to their apartments, things like that, and they often don't charge a broker fee because you're working directly with the company. If you're working with a landlord, they can't charge a broker fee because they aren't an actual agent. So I'd say if you work with a broker, if you have to, or if you can't avoid it, a lot of landlords in Boston will use a broker or an agency company to help with their apartment listings. So you usually can't avoid it. But one thing to look for is if you're trying to save money, you can always look for something that doesn't charge a broker fee. Steve, I don't know if you have things to add on that.
Well said.
Yeah, I've been through it a few times.
Well said.
Okay, let's see. I'm moving with family. I'm looking for an apartment in a good school district. So I will say a lot of for those of you who may have family and children coming with you, um, we have some resources on our website for like nearby schools and things like that. Often I recommend looking at places like the off-campus services website, even looking at places like, apartments.com and stuff like that, that'll tell you about the neighborhood and nearby schools and how those schools are rated as well. Because that's usually the easiest way to find a place. I'd also say space is a premium in Boston. So if you are coming with a family, maybe the South End doesn't apply to you because a 3 or 4 bedroom in the South End is going to be like well above most students' budgets. So sometimes you have to look a bit further out, and that's where the various aggregate site websites can help. It's also good to work with companies in that case because they can maybe help you find other places. But I'd say look at like off-campus services website. We can't really recommend any one specific place because a lot of the schools in Boston are very good. So that's kind of one of the issues. There's a lot of good schools in Boston. So it kind of goes back to how much space do you need on top of like finding a good school and then finding kind of the distance to school. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. I'd say it's good to start now and utilize the various resources on the web or even just looking at school maps for a place that you want to start. If the most important thing is like the quality of the schools, maybe start by looking at like the different schools, their quality, and then look in those neighborhoods or those areas. Is it usually required to have insurance when someone is renting an apartment? Yes. It's not very expensive though. I think usually like $20 a month, if that, for rental insurance. I don't. Is it required like a Massachusetts law, Steve, to have it?
No, it's not. It's not a law. We actually never required it up
Okay.
until this past year,
Yeah.
when my insurance company, my liability insurance company, started requiring it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes, but students might be covered under their parents' homeowners policy.
Yep.
Or I think the least expensive around is like a AAA if they belong to AAA or CAA. They might be able to go that route, and it'll say in the lease what the requirements are, what the parameters are for the insurance. So you have to make sure that, but that takes place after you sign the contract. You just have to contact your insurance agent and get a policy and then submit it to the owner slash management company.
Yeah, and it really is. It's fairly cheap. I think I'm required to have it, and it's like $15 a month for like a lot of insurance coverage. I think it can be as little as like $10 a month. And it's definitely, I would say it's something I would get I would recommend to anyone just to kind of spend the extra light coffee or two a month to have it, because it does cover most of what you own. And a lot of them will cover things like even your bikes or scooters or things like that, if they're stolen. So definitely something just to look for. How can I know if my student loan is enough for renting an apartment? That is a great question. How much do I want to get into student loans? You can look on the Student Financial Services website on the loans page to see what your academic year is and how much your loans are going to be or how much you're eligible to receive. We do not currently have like the cost of attendance for the new year posted yet. Usually that's available within the next week or two. So I'd say if you are a student using student loans, keep an eye on the Student Financial Services website over the next few weeks. We'll be releasing kind of the cost of attendance so the most that students can borrow. Um, Typically speaking, our cost of attendance will include what's called like living expense budget, and that is oftentimes around the median or so maybe the mean average of rent for our students. And it's something that we kind of look at every year. So that gives you a good place to start. But I would really say, you know, maybe wait a couple weeks if you are, or just kind of start looking at an idea for where you want to live, figure out what your budget might need to be. And then when we release those numbers here within the next few weeks, that'll give you a better idea of how to budget. But if you do use student loans, you're using federal loans, the FAFSA is delayed, which is causing all sorts of fun issues with student loan borrowers, which is causing issues with like us being able to tell you how much you can borrow. So hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have all of that for those students. So just keep an eye out on our website. Can you talk a little bit about income requirements for renting? That's a great question.
That is a good question. So it's typically, well, let me say this, it really depends on the landlord. And it depends on the management company. It depends on your entire application in its entirety, whether or not you have co-signers, whether the co-signers are required. It's going to depend on credit scores, if that's going to be run as well. So it's not really, I can't just give you a percentage and say that everybody lives by that same percentage. Some companies want, you'd be making more money. Some companies are okay with less. It really depends on where you're applying to.
Yeah, and I will say
How's that for?
No, I think
I was
I
gonna say,
hate to
how's
say
that
the
for
not.
beating
I
around
really
the?
say the non-committal answer is probably the best answer because it's true. You'll often hear like 3 times income, but as students, that doesn't really mean much. Um, a lot of the landlords and property managers in the Boston area work with students. They're familiar with like students aren't bringing in a ton of money because they're in school. So generally, I would just say it really is. It's each landlord's different. Each company's different. You know, closer to usually in like May or June when students have like a financial aid award letter, it's something you can show to your landlord to as kind of proof of your ability to pay. So it really just depends on the landlord. Our website has some resources on like what you should have available when you go to sign a lease. But you can also reach out to us if you have questions. But yeah, the hard part about income requirements when you're a student is it just really varies. You'll find some landlords will just say no, they don't want to rent to students because it is more of an issue because there is no income. Um, some are very used to renting to students, so they're much more amicable to like income requirements. So it really just kind of depends on, I'd say have a good list of places that you're looking at and see what the requirements actually are for each individual place.
But again, if you reach out to those companies that are on the BU website, they're obviously advertising on college website.
Yeah.
They know that they're attracting college students, so they're going to be much more open to working with you and having that information regarding the units that they're going to be showing you versus if you just call someone off of a Craigslist ad that either may or may not be willing to work with you.
Yep. What is a timeline if you are planning to move in early August? How early should you start looking? now.
Now is a great time to be gathering your information, asking questions, narrowing things down, sort of getting laser focused on what you're looking for, what you and your roommate might be looking for, and then going out in March, April, and securing that housing. The best I've found over the years, the best students are the ones that rent their apartments in March and April. May starts to get busy. People are getting busy with finals, studying, thinking about the end of the year. So March, April tends to be a good time because they're getting a good jump on everybody else. Once people get accepted to Boston, if they find out that they're not going to have housing available to them, then you're going to have a big influx of those people as well, transfer students. Don't forget, there's over 400,000 students in Boston. It's not all BU. There's a lot of schools here with a lot of people coming in on different timelines. But I would say, March, April is a great time to secure your housing, whether you're looking in July, August, or 9/1, which is this sort of D-Day in Boston.
9/1's the day you don't go outside.
Mm.
Yeah, and I will add, because I know I'm assuming there's probably a lot of incoming advanced standing dental students here who may be starting in July and August. Um, you'll hear a lot of 9/1, September 1st is what really matters. That's where everything's at. There's a lot of schools in Boston. There's a lot of students who start in July and August, and there's a lot of apartments that kind of reflect that still. So you're not going to see the same amount of like apartments available in July 1 as you will September 1st, but there's still a lot of places available. People are coming and going all the time. You'll have, especially like May and June, a lot of people breaking leases because they've graduated and they're moving. So those places will try to fill in July and August. So it's just kind of start now to try to secure that, but there'll still be things available. The absolute worst case that we've run into, and I believe I have a link on our presentation here, just so I have it. Some students we find will try to rent a place September 1st. And what they'll do is look for short-term housing if they're starting in July or August. That's also an option if you just can't find anything. We do have a link here on our presentation for short-term housing options that students have used in the past. So that can be an option if you're just getting down to the wire and you're like, I can't find anything before September 1st. But there's usually enough available for people if they're looking.
Alex, I thought the worst case scenario was you were going to let them live with you and your wife.
I don't have enough space. Sorry, everyone. Couch isn't even big enough. What documents are usually needed to sign off on a lease?
So, again, you're going to want to have driver's license, acceptance from BU, either an acceptance letter or your BU ID. If you are, applying for this on your own with income, you're going to want to have income verification, either a tax return, if it's recent and relevant, or if you're working and you have a recent pay stub or an offer letter, that would be great. If you're a foreign student coming in, your passport, your visa, if you have it, or if you can show that you've applied for your visa, and the same with the I-20. Either if you have it, or if you can show that you've applied for it, that's helpful.
Perfect. Okay. Moving along here. So many questions. A lot of questions with moving in July and August, so hopefully answered those. How far out would you say is a great for affordable housing, but a reasonable commute under 45 minutes? We get this question a lot. I will again refer back to kind of our housing guide, especially I will say if you're a dental student, our housing guide was a lot of dental students who filled it out, so you can see where a lot of them live. A lot of our students on the affordable side, affordable really just depends on each person and what is kind of what is affordable. Like, what is your budget? Depends on what is your budget. Some students, their budget's very high, some it's very low. I would really recommend you can look at the housing guide. Our neighborhood reference sheet on our website also includes kind of commute time for students. So, oftentimes we'll have students who are living in like the Alston Brighton area, which is about 30 or 40 minutes by BU shuttle to the medical campus. Some students will live in Somerville and Cambridge, which I wouldn't say is necessarily cheaper. It's cheaper than the South End, but it's not much cheaper. And more, we do have students living in like the Quincy, Dorchester area because it's a red line commute and pretty close to the medical campus. But really, it's maybe you find a deal that's closer. Maybe you realize that your budget actually works for something that's closer. But there are a lot of places available. I would really just suggest either looking at the housing guide or starting to just look at different apartments based on what your budget is, and you'll quickly see like what neighborhoods are kind of in your wheelhouse. But if you're really starting out and you're super confused and have no idea where to start, just the housing guide. I will say a lot of our students do live in Alston and Brighton because it's where a lot of BU, BC, Northeastern students live. So it tends to be a little bit on the less expensive side, but it is about about a 40-minute commute by BU shuttle. Are most rental options furnished or not? I'd say most aren't. And if they are, they're very clear up front that it is furnished. Some of these questions I might come back to. So the one question, let me see if I can find it here, was, can you talk a little bit more about Our Home Boston? There's a lot of kind of there's a lot of options like Nesterly, Our Home. Really what they are is you're kind of living with a family. So it's like cohabitation. Nesterly is usually with retirees and things like that, and they just need someone around the house. Maybe they had an empty nest now. Our Home Boston's similar, where it's a family home where maybe they have an empty bedroom because a kid went off to college or something. So they're kind of nice. They tend to be a little bit cheaper. Obviously, they're a little bit higher demand, and you don't get as much of a choice because there's not as many postings as like a random apartment. But it is something you can look at if you're trying to look at like different options. We have had students who do like Nesterly in Our Home, and they actually really enjoy kind of the cohabitation with like a family or like a retiree. So that could be something if you're like, especially if you're extroverted or you just want the companionship. Some people like that. So I'd say take a look and see and get an idea for what it is, because it really depends on the individual person posting their listing. But cool option. It's just something else to kind of consider if you're looking for a place to live. A few questions about the medical student residence. So that's a great question. It is available just to medical students, unfortunately. So if you are like a dental student or a public health student or in the graduate medical sciences, it's the medical student residence is the on-campus housing for the medical school or for the medical campus, and it's just medical students. So if you are not a medical student, you'd have to look for off-campus options or look for graduate BU housing on the Fenway or Charles River campus. Quick plug, apply now if you haven't and want to try to live in BU housing on one of those campuses, because the application just opened, I think, last week, and it goes pretty quickly. So if you are interested in living on the Charles River campus or the Fenway campus, which is like a 20-30 minute bus ride, definitely do it. There are some pretty low cost options, but there's not enough housing for everyone. So get on it while you can. Does graduate housing permit emotional support animals? What paperwork do you need to bring? Yeah, for emotional support animals, I'd say on campus, you usually have to have something from disability services, so you can always reach out to them. Off campus, if you're looking for that, service animals are a lot easier. Emotional support animals, it's not a law. Most of the time, landlords can be flexible, but it's just kind of reaching out to your landlord or property manager and discussing that with them. Are references required? That's a great Steve, you want to talk a little bit about having to have maybe like a co-signer or other references for your lease?
So typically with students, we do require cosigners. And we just try to make that we do make it a blanket rule just so that we don't have to decide between one versus the other. References, personally, I've been doing this for a while. And I also understand that if you have a reference that you're going to give me, I'm assuming that they're going to tell me how wonderful and great and how fortunate I am to have you living in one of our buildings. So, the references, I don't really put a lot of stock in, and we don't require it. I mean, we do want an emergency contact number if heaven forbid something happens, but I'm a big believer.
Yeah, and I would say our experience working with students who have these questions is you most often will have to have some sort of like a cosigner. It can be tricky for international students, especially because you typically have to have some sort of US based cosigner. If I'd say if you're looking for roommates and you're especially if you're an international student, it's great to have a US roommate because it often will make it a little bit easier to get through that process with some landlords and property companies. But it's really just a matter of asking. They usually will tell you up front like what they're going to require before they can approve your lease. Da, da, da. Let's see other questions that we can ask here. Do do do. How about parking? Parking in Boston is terrible. I would highly encourage you, unless you absolutely need a car, to not bring a car. Um, Parking on the BU medical campus is very limited, and it's usually about 200 to 300 a month. Most places that have rental properties will be on street parking. If it has off street parking, that's a pretty nice perk that's not very common. If in a lot of apartment buildings will charge extra for parking as well, so another like 300 to 400 a month for that. um, Driving in Boston itself is just not great either. And the medical campus, I always tell students, the medical campus it's on a bunch of different bus lines. It's not very far from any of the subway lines. So it's a pretty nice location to get to. Getting here by car is very annoying. And I'd say, we deal with this question a lot with medical and dental students who might be doing rotations and clinicals. Oftentimes it's cheaper to not have a car and to just like rent a car for your rotation or your clinical if it's like off public transportation. Students will save thousands of dollars over the course of their program by just renting a car when they need it rather than trying to bring a car with them for the like 1 year they might need it. So yeah, don't I'd say avoid driving, avoid bringing a car if you can, because it's pretty rough and it's expensive. Um, okay. But you all keep houses. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I've actually gotten some updates. The housing application, it looks like, isn't open yet for new students, so my bad. My apologies. Keep an eye on the BU housing page. Usually it's like mid-March is when that'll open and you can apply for that. Some questions about like occupancy for on-campus housing. The Fenway campus, if you can get in graduate housing, is I think a 15-minute bus ride. And it's usually like single person. So again, if you can manage to get in graduate housing owned by BU, it's just a short bus ride away. But there's about 20,000 graduate and professional students at BU, and there's about like 2,000 bedrooms for graduate students. So unfortunately, it's very limited. So I wouldn't put all of your eggs in that basket to get campus housing, but it's a good place to start. Okay, let's take a look here and see any other questions that we can answer. Questions specifically about Beacon Realty. I would say reach out to Steve if you have questions. I will answer questions about Beacon Realty for Steve. All right, well, perfect. It looks like there's no new questions, and it is 1 o'clock. So that's great. Any last minute questions? Those of you, I'm getting some direct messages. You're welcome to hang out, and I'll answer those once we're done officially. But I don't want to make everyone else help stay. So I just wanted to chime in again. We will post all of this information on our website within the next week. If you haven't registered, you can scan the QR code or visit our website and just register for today's event. You can also sign up for more information about our other events, including our housing fair, and we'll send out information to students along the way as those events come up. Other than that, thank you very much, Steve, for joining us as always. Great information. And thank you everyone else for joining us. Okay, so I'm gonna stop recording and then